I needed to know more. I had learned what I'd learned from the perspective of religion. I needed to learn it from the perspective of psychology and metaphysics. There was a higher percentage of seekers in India than anywhere else in any other country that I knew about. I had an opportunity to go there via a conference, Eastern Mysticism and Western Science, and I went. But before I went, I had known about a ancient, apparently ancient youthful sage named Babaji. All that means is Holy Father, or Father Sir. Babaji. He didn't have a name. And allegedly he was from a lineage of gurus, ancient gurus, who manifested himself from time to time to help those who were seeking find their way to enlightenment. He appeared in the 1700s, apparently, allegedly, off and on. Well, is that true or not? Is that real or not? I knew enough science and I knew enough physics that a lot of things that people don't understand were possible. But I wanted to go for myself and experience. So India was the place. I went seeking this Babaji, and I had heard that he was in the Himalayas, in a place called Mount Kailash. And so that was way east of Bombay, the other side of the Indian subcontinent. But I was in Bombay. While in Bombay attending this conference, I was approached by an Indian man who was very tall and young. And he said, "Sir." He approached me and he said, "Sir." And I said, "Yes." He said, "Am I to understand you are seeking Babaji?" Now that was one of my first shocks in India. I said, "How do you know that? How do you know I'm seeking Babaji?" He said, "Sir, he's actually in Bombay now with many of his disciples, and he is at this place." So he handed me this piece of paper with an address on it and walked away. That was the day I left the conference and I headed to this place where Babaji was. I saw him with thousands of people sitting at his feet, Indians and others, Americans and others sitting at his feet. And nothing was happening. He wasn't talking. The people weren't talking. They were all chanting. They were chanting a great Eastern mantra called Om Namah Shivaya. And they were all chanting that mantra, which means salutations to the light within you, salutations to the name of the one who's full of light. So it's a greeting, and they even do that greeting. The Indian people do that, namaste. Like, greetings to the one, to the light in your heart. Greeting, namaste. Namah Shivaya actually names it the infinite. I sit down with thousands of people on the ground under a tent the size of Texas, in the middle of Bombay, in all this poverty. So the chanting continued, and when the chanting was done, this youthful, boyish Indian man rises up after the chanting and walks out of the tent. He walks down the aisle looking at nobody. We're all sitting like you on the floor, on the ground. Walks by looking at nobody except me. He holds his gaze on me as he walks all the way to me and walks by me, and I him. And then turns and continues on out. Everybody sits still. Nobody moves. They wait for him to leave with their heads bowed. I'm the only one with my chin up, being anti-devotional, studying him, thinking You look a lot like my uncle when he was young. Who are you? And so he walked out of the tent, but he didn't get out because as soon as he passed me, I got up against protocol and I followed him out. I walked right alongside of him until he got out of the tent.
How were you feeling? Was your heart rate up?
No, not yet. Not yet. Walked out of the tent. Outside there were many, many people milling around who were not in the tent chanting. Walked out of the tent and I stayed right close by him. And I reached out to touch him. And he disappeared. And at the same time I reached out and there was a woman next to me. Turns out she was from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I grabbed her arm and I said, "What did he do?" I was squeezing her arm so tightly because I had lost him. And she said, "Ouch, you're hurting me." And I let her go and she said, "He comes and goes." And I said, "Where does he go?" She said, "I don't know where he goes, but he'll be back." I said, "He'll be back where?" She said, "Up in that apartment is where he's staying. He'll be up back there." I said, "Thank you," and I headed for that apartment. I went up there and my first period of time, I sat there 3 days. I stayed there 3 days, sleeping, eating, sitting right there, going to the toilet once in a while, but right there. And he came and he went during those 3 days. He came into the apartment and then he would disappear and then he'd come and he'd come and go. And I ate because he threw fruit and cashew nuts around. And the fruit and the cashew nuts that I ate were all vibrating. They were all humming with what I called energy, charged with some kind of energy. Again, I knew scientifically they're all atoms and they're all vibrating anyway. I just generally can't feel them vibrate, but they are. They're all humming with energy. And so I stayed there eating oranges and bananas and cashew nuts for those days, watching very carefully and studying, taking mental notes, which I would write later. And then I got tired of it, and I left.
So how did you know that Babaji wasn't your teacher? Because I assume you thought, I've been called to him. You went around to his house for 3 days. How did you know?
Well, for one thing, he didn't talk. He never said a word. For another reason, he did not strike me as someone who was in the teaching business that I required, but rather he was a guru or a saint or a sage or an enlightened being that gathered disciples who just wanted to be with him and piggyback or just be around him, like were thrilled just to be with him. His people were with him because he was their protector, and they would want to go or be wherever he was. And I did not require that kind of teacher. They simply accepted that's the way it is. They never asked those questions. Where are you from? Are you real? What's this about? How does this relate to a God? Are you God? They didn't have any such questions. They just worshiped him. And that, to me, was the religion I had left. No worship for me. If there's a deity, and I believe there is a supreme infinite being, it is not interested in me, a creature, worshiping it. So I left Babaji and I headed for Ganesh Puri.